In the heart of winter, when even the gods seem to have abandoned the north, the Vikings built something few people know about. Underground shelters, carved out of ice and mud, sealed against the wind, made to trick death itself. These weren't simple huts. They were survival machines, designed to capture heat, hide smoke, and keep a single flame alive while the world outside froze to death. But how did they do it? How did men with primitive tools and hands, cracked by ice, manage to build warmth beneath frozen ground? How did they dig shelter in soil that even iron could barely break? Today, you'll discover the darkest side of Viking survival, the underground homes that defied the North's killing cold. The wind howls across a white immensity. You are a Viking farmer, and the world around you is buried under so much snow that even the houses have disappeared. The sun hasn't risen for days. The sea has turned to ice. The cold is so sharp it feels like the air itself is cutting you. The firewood is gone. The livestock is dead. And yet, somewhere beneath the frozen ground, life still flickers. Entire families have vanished, not because they fled, but because they dug themselves a refuge. And now you must do the same. Dig, build, survive. Let's trace the steps you'd take to face winter like a true Viking. Most people know Vikings for their ships and battles, but their real enemy didn't carry swords. It came from the sky. When winter arrived, the North stopped being a home and became a sentence. Snow, ice, and slicing winds erased everything. Fields, villages, even the sound of the sea. For months, the world froze. In that season, strength and courage weren't enough. To survive, Vikings needed something more: ingenuity. They learned to turn the earth itself into protection. They built shelters that didn't just resist the cold, they defied it. Their houses were built with purpose. Every wall, every roof, every piece of timber had a job: to hold heat and cheat death. And here is where the secret begins. While some faced winter in vast longhouses, the great halls most people know today, others found an even more effective way to hide from the cold. They went down. They dug their own shelter beneath the frozen ground. Down there, far from the wind and the snow, they found warmth that seemed impossible. The true Viking refuge wasn't above the earth, but beneath it. And you? What would you do to keep from being swallowed by the cold? If winter hit now and everything around you froze, would you have the courage to carve your own shelter under the ice? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how far you'd go to escape the cold. But before we break down how they built ingenious underground shelters, we need the foundation, the starting point that turned Nordic architecture into a survival weapon: the longhouse. These buildings were far more than homes. They were fortresses against the cold. Amid the darkness and slicing winds, the longhouse was the center of Norse life. Families slept there, cooked there, prayed there, and waited for winter to pass. They were large and robust, built to withstand snow, ice, and storms. A single longhouse could hold not just one family, but several generations, and even their animals. Inside, warmth was as precious as gold. But how did they survive months of brutal cold with nothing but wood and clay? Viking longhouses were long and narrow, many stretching beyond 20 meters. Instead of high walls or open roofs, Vikings kept their houses low to the ground. Why? Because a lower structure took less of a beating from the wind. Cold air stayed out, and warm air stayed trapped inside. The frame was made of thick wooden posts, driven deep into the soil or set on stones, especially where the ground froze. This spine carried the building's weight. Every beam was placed with precision, because the weight of snow could crush a poorly designed house. The walls had a vital job: block the wind and hold the heat. Depending on the region, materials changed, but the goal was always the same: survive. In forested areas, they stacked logs horizontally, sealing the gaps with moss or mud. creating thick walls that breathed slowly without letting the cold in. In more barren or icy regions like Iceland and northern Norway, wood was scarce, so Vikings adapted, building with stone, blocks of turf, compacted grassy earth, or hardened clay. Another common method was wattle and daub, woven branches plastered with a mix of mud, straw, clay, and animal dung. Dirty? Yes, but once dry, it became a solid warm wall, almost a natural insulation. It blocked wind, it trapped heat, and it kept rain out. Some houses went further. Double walls packed with moss, straw, or sheep's wool. Primitive, yet effective, thermal insulation. Every detail served a single purpose: keep the heat and life inside. Every detail served another single purpose: keep the fire alive. And nothing mattered more than the roof. Roofs were true shields, the first and last line of defense against winter. They were pitched so snow would slide off, and layered, wooden planks or birch bark, resistant to moisture. On top, turf blocks, thick slabs of earth with the grass facing up. These blocks were heavy, and that was the point. The weight pinned the roof down against violent winds, while the dense earth locked warmth inside. Over time, something curious happened. Little plants sprouted across the roof, a sign of life in winter's white death. And when snow piled up, the insulation grew even better. The colder it got outside, the warmer it became inside. The floor was smartly designed, too. Many houses had packed earth covered in dry straw to absorb moisture and warm the space. More elaborate homes had raised wooden floors, letting air circulate beneath and creating a natural barrier against frost. At the center of the longhouse lay the soul of survival, the hearth, a fire that burned day and night, heating, lighting, and cooking. There were no chimneys. The roof was gently curved, with only a small opening for smoke to escape. Some of the smoke lingered in the air, adding warmth and keeping insects away. Doors were purposely small. You had to stoop to enter, and that kept heat from rushing out. Gaps were sealed with moss, straw, or wool, and inside, animal pelts hung like thermal curtains. Windows? Almost none. Glass was a distant luxury, and any opening was a threat. If there was a window, it was tiny, covered with stretched animal bladder or thin leather, letting in a thread of light without letting the cold in. In winter, the houses were dark, lit only by the fire and small lamps fueled by animal fat. Imagine living like that for months, surrounded by darkness, with only firelight and the smell of smoke. Could you bear it? Inside, every space was designed to hold heat. No corridors, no big rooms. Beds and benches were built into the walls, raised off the floor, and people slept side by side, wrapped in furs. Collective body heat filled the air. Many longhouses also sheltered animals. Goats, sheep, and cows shared the space with families, separated only by a wooden partition. The animals' body heat helped warm the house. Every breath, every movement, every flame, everything contributed to keeping life going. Food and tools were stored above the hearth, where the rising heat kept them dry. Inside, the air was dense, hot, and heavy, but it meant life and still. Not every Viking had the privilege of a well-built longhouse. The poor travelers or craftspeople had to improvise, and at that edge, an even more ingenious solution emerged. They dug. They turned the earth itself into shelter. Underground shelters, simple, discreet, and almost invisible under snow, were the final answer to winter's fury. And if you're enjoying learning how Vikings really defied cold and death, drop a like. It helps the channel reach more people and keeps this forgotten northern history alive. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss upcoming episodes on the darker side of the Viking Age. Though longhouses are best known, Vikings also mastered another art, the art of living beneath the earth. When the cold was implacable, when even longhouses couldn't hold back the wind, they went down. They carved the frozen ground with their own hands and turned the underworld into refuge. In Iceland, Scotland, and Norway, Archaeologists have found underground shelters and turf houses so well built that even centuries later they still hold warmth. In places like Minehow, in Scotland, steps descend straight into darkness, where fire and silence were the only weapons against winter. These structures weren't just shelters, they were monuments to survival. The poorest built pit houses, a simple, brilliant solution. They were partially underground, dug about half a meter to a meter deep. That depth was enough for the surrounding soil to act as natural insulation, keeping the interior 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the outside, a kind of primitive geothermal heating. They were cheap, quick to build, and ideal for low-income families, travelers, or artisans who needed temporary shelter. From the outside, they looked like mounds covered in earth and moss, but inside, they were havens of heat and ingenuity. The walls were reinforced with wooden planks or woven branches, coated with the same mix of mud, straw, and dung used in longhouses. Once dry, that layer became sturdy, durable, and most importantly, warm. The roof, supported by curved beams, was covered with thatch and turf blocks, creating near-perfect insulation. From outside, you could barely see a thing, just a small hump of snow and a thin ribbon of smoke from a vent inside. A lifetime's refuge. A small, steady fire burned at the center. Smoke escaped through a slit in the roof, and heat spread slowly, trapped beneath the weight of the earth. The space was tight, stuffy, lit only by fat lamps, but inside, the cold didn't win. Entrances were short and narrow, packed with pelts and moss, sometimes preceded by little tunnels to keep the wind from rushing in. Heat came from the fire, the earth, and the bodies themselves. And when winter seemed endless, these houses became more than shelter. They were silent fortresses, built not with luxury, but with pure intelligence. Underground shelters offered advantages even longhouses didn't have. Total isolation from wind and ice, stable interior temperature, even during prolonged blizzards, low fuel consumption, since heat stayed trapped. Natural camouflage, making them almost invisible in the white landscape. And most importantly, they were within everyone's reach. No need for wealth, only the will to survive. And when winter ended, these shelters remained, buried, forgotten, but ready for the next cold. Beneath the snow, the Vikings left traces of warmth, and when the snow finally began to melt, they emerged. They came out of the earth's belly as if reborn, exhausted, starving, but alive. And for a Viking, that was victory enough. For centuries, these underground shelters slept on, keeping the secret of human survival in the face of the impossible. Because while the cold conquered the world above, the fire still burned below. They proved that strength isn't just in the sword, but in ingenuity, adaptation, and the courage to face death itself with your own hands. And now I want to hear from you. Could you survive inside a Viking shelter? Tell me in the comments, because honestly, I'm not sure I could. If you liked discovering the darker side of Viking survival, leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next stories. And of course, share this video with anyone who loves legends time almost froze. That way you help keep this flame alive, because telling these stories is our way of keeping the fire burning. See you in the next dive into history's shadows. Drop a comment on which story you want us to unearth next.